New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Spinward Operations Area, System The Last Resort, Zenith Jump Point, November 18th, 3152. Noelle felt a bead of sweat run down her cheek as she flipped her Korak C into yet another arcing turn. The fighting was chaotic, desperate, and increasingly focused on her and Washi. The captain of the Last Resort's jump ship, the Skyfire, must have contacted the supporting aerospace fighters to focus on the two Raven pilots who were continually hammering a single location on the jump ship. Even as the Combine's Kikumaru burned and the Nara lagged behind, the two NEC pilots did not waver from their target. The fire from the Skyfire's aerospace fighters was inconsistent and unpracticed. Only the occasional round of autocannon fire or a glancing laser had hit her ship so far. Washi's Koraks showed the scorched markings of a PPC hit, but it was at extreme range and did only minor damage to the ship's wing. The Skyfire was now on course towards the Rabbit's Foot, and it was imperative that they do everything they could to even the odds. While she hadn't been able to directly contact Washi since the comlinks were locked down, she knew the plan, and they had been running it for 6 passes already. Pulling back on the stick, Noelle lined up her nose with the target, an already torn and savaged seam down the middle of the hulking jump ship. It was hard to miss at this point, as the damage the Ravens had already done was devastating. Every flight of LRMs burrowed deeper and deeper into the ship, followed by medium lasers that raked the contents inside. This time, when she fired into the ship, it shuddered. Slight shaking at first, and then with a wrenching twist of stressed steel and titanium buckling, it lost its structural integrity under the tremendous pressure it was under. Had there been an atmosphere around them, the noise would have been tremendous as the jump ship's tail end pushed forward while the front twisted up at an increasingly odd angle to its acceleration. The maneuvering jets near the front of the ship continued to fire, and it was twisting itself apart. Washi's theory had been correct after all. The Skyfire had been a Frankenstein's monster combination of multiple large ships, and that line that they identified with Miri's help had been the key to breaking it. Noelle chuckled to herself, knowing that there would be no shutting him up now when they returned to the Rabbit's Foot. The Skyfire's propulsion jets stopped, and the ship continued to drift towards the Rabbit's Foot, while leaving broken bits and pieces behind. The comlink crackled to life, and Captain Rin's voice was stressed and stern when she said, "Ravens, back to the ship immediately. Cease fire. I repeat again, cease fire." Noelle changed course, leaving the Skyfire behind, feeling as proud as anyone could in their accomplishment. They might have just saved the whole mission. "So, do I get credit for killing the jump ship, or do you?" Noelle spoke into the comlink with the other Koraks. Washi's voice was clear, and he was quick to respond with, "I found the vulnerability, but you did get that last hit. I say we share it, Af?" "Well bargained and done," Noelle replied. System, The Last Resort, Zenith Jump Point, Jump Ship, Rabbit's Foot. Rin was sitting in the command chair of the bridge, considering if she would be able to live with herself if she jumped the Rabbit's Foot out of the system before the Eulalia returned. While doing so would keep the remaining crew on the jump ship safe, it would spell almost certain doom for her oldest friend and her new friends alike. If she stayed, it looked like they would be disabled or captured by the Skyfire and almost certainly end up in prison or worse. Paralyzed by indecision, she didn't notice the holotable flicker back to life until Corporal Kirsch stood up and yelped at Rin. "What?" Rin said as she shook her head out of the funk she was in. Miri restated the message in her hands. She read, "Ceasefire and stand down. We have a message from the Last Resort and wish to negotiate to end hostilities." A wave of relief rushed through Rin as she felt the pressure diminish. After a second, she rushed over to the command chair and ordered the Ravens to return to the Rabbit's Foot. Turning back toward the holotable, she could make out the damaged bent frame of the Skyfire and the Nara behind it, which was already in the process of recovering survivors from the Kikumaru and its dropships. "Captain, Guider Flores would like to talk to you," Miri said from her console. Rin sighed and shook her head before saying, "Grab Captain Oren as well. Let's sort this out." Standing up from the command chair, Rin walked to the holotable and waited. Captain Oren's face appeared in green light, looking frustrated and overwhelmed. Guider Flores appeared a few moments later, also looking quite flustered. "If it's all the same to you, Guider Flores, I think we need to stop interacting with each other. First impressions are everything, but we're on the 5th or 6th impression now, and I'm not liking you anymore," Rin said, scowling at the hologram. She hoped her body language carried over on Flores' end. Flores was interrupted by someone out of view, and she glared at them and then faced the camera again. She began to speak when Captain Oren cut her off. His words were curt and threatening. He said, "You've declared war on the entire Draconis Combine. Even if you wiped out every one of us today, our absence will be an obvious message to the dragon." Flores shook her head and said, "None of that matters to me. The starport says you have Gia in custody. Is that the case?" Rin glanced over at the timer on the command chair screen before responding, "That is correct. You're lucky she wasn't on the Kikumaru. You might have killed her in your initial act of brutality." Yes, that would have been quite a shame. Anyway, I think it's about time we ended this conflict," Flores said dismissively before adding, "In exchange for Gia's safe transfer to the Skyfire, I'll allow your ships to leave the system without any additional aggression." Rin sighed softly before responding, "Consider us somewhat wary of this deal. You are earning somewhat of a reputation for being less than honorable." This statement made Flores bristle a bit. The Combine captain took the opportunity to jump into the conversation again when he said, "We would be willing to discuss the transfer of the prisoner you call Gia as part of the existing deal to transfer your communications blocking technology." This time it was Rin's turn to bristle. Her brow furrowed and she said, "Excuse me, Captain Oren, that is..." But her statement was cut off. Captain Oren interrupted when he said, "You are nothing more than an observer here, Captain. The Combine will negotiate as it sees fit, or you can have your contract cancelled." Rin gripped the edge of the holotable as if she were trying to rip it from the steel decking and flip it over. She resolved at that moment that if the NEC was to exist after this trip, they would need new financiers. System, the last resort, Zenith jump point, dropship, Eulalia. Peeking through the door of the bridge of the Eulalia, Tenica quickly surveyed the room. Everything looked normal, with a couple of the crew at their stations looking busy, and the empty command chair overlooking the jump ships at the Zenith point. The bridge wasn't exactly spacious, so it seemed this wasn't Gia's first destination. Cal and Max were not far behind, each carrying their rifles. They stepped into the bridge and cleared it while Tenica moved back down the corridor, checking each room and storage area as she went. In the distance, it was possible to hear the sounds of Vasil banging around somewhere in his armor. The hallways and rooms of the Eulalia weren't exactly sized for an elemental in his armor. When she looked into the galley, Tenica thought she heard something, so she stepped inside. That's when she was kicked hard and sent sprawling onto the floor. The gantry bar made a clatter as it slipped from her grasp and slid across the deck. She retained the pistol and aimed it at Gia, firing only a fraction too late. The laser burned over Gia's shoulder as she deftly leapt towards Tenica at an angle. The two grappled, and soon Gia was kneeling over Tenica's chest, trying to wrench the pistol from her grip. "I need this more than you, little Mechwarrior," Gia spoke as she gripped Tenica's wrist with one hand and let her weight fall with the other arm, smashing her elbow into Tenica's face. Seeing stars, Tenica groaned and tasted iron as the elbow smashed something loose in her jaw. The pistol was feeling heavier and harder to hang on to by the second, as Gia seemed to have the upper hand. Giving in to the anger she had over the attack on Vasil, Tenica roared and kicked her feet down, thrusting her whole body up and pushing Gia off of her. Both the women fell onto the steel plate. Gia rose with the laser pistol in her hand, and that predatory smile seemed to run ear to ear as she aimed it in Tenica's direction. Tenica rolled, dodging one laser shot and then another as the little aluminum table caught the brunt of the second shot. "Just give up. When Vasil finds you, he's going to pull you apart," Tenica growled as she grabbed for the steel gantry bar. Gia laughed and fired into the wall near Tenica's head. "Last I saw your clanner, he was bleeding out with a chair leg in his chest." Brow furrowed, Tenica gripped the steel bar and waited for the opportunity. When Gia fired again into the table, Tenica launched herself up and over and swung the bar as hard as she could. It connected with Gia's left arm, and there was a loud crack of bone shattering. Gia let out a yelp and fell to the side. The laser pistol fired, and a bolt passed into Tenica's left leg, mid-thigh. The pain was intense, and Tenica stumbled, gripping the now charred hole in her leg with her free hand. "This was fun, but I owe you this," Gia said as she lined the gun up with Tenica's face. Instead of pulling the trigger, Gia's eyes went wide as the elemental armor pushed its way into the galley. Gia fired the pistol at Vasil, but the laser only charred paint in the armor's chest plate. "What took you so long?" Tenica said, grimacing from the pain. Gia fired again as Vasil stomped into the room and gripped the arm holding the pistol with the battle armor's manipulator. Showing remarkable grace, he only squeezed hard enough to force her to drop the pistol with a shriek of pain. Tenica watched with great satisfaction as the self-fashioned seductress was lifted unceremoniously up from the deck by her arm. Her legs dangled and feet fought to find purchase on Vasil's armor to try to pull or twist away, but the battle claw gripped her arm tightly. "You'll burn for this! Guider Flores will leave your ships as smoking wrecks," Gia screamed as Vasil turned and walked her out of the galley. Stumbling back to her feet, Tenica followed the sounds of Gia's screams and complaints down the passageway to the cargo bay. Vasil walked with determination across the floor, a man with a mission. When Gia saw his destination, she squirmed and screamed even louder. As hard as she pulled and kicked, she just couldn't get free. Tenica turned the corner just in time to see Vasil toss Gia into the airlock with enough force that she thumped against the far door with a disconcerting slap. Gia slowly crawled to her knees, glaring at Vasil as the inner door closed. Her fists pounded the small glass window of the door. Her screaming was heavily muffled as Vasil quickly hit the button to open the outer door. There was a hiss as the atmosphere was sucked from the small chamber and Gia's eyes went wide. Not with anger this time, but with fear. The outer door opened, and in a rush, the remaining oxygen and the woman who had terrorized the NEC for so long were emptied out into space. By the time Tenica reached Vasil, he had dropped to one knee and was leaning against the airlock door. "Are you okay? We need to get you to a medic on the Rabbit's Foot. We're almost there," she cried out as she tugged on his armor, trying to find a way to get to her friend who was clearly hurting inside. Vasil's voice through the speaker was raspy and weak, so weak it startled Tenica to her core. Staring into the reflective view screen of the elemental's armor, she wished she could get to him. "Tenica, I will try to hang on, but my war may be at an end," he managed to say. "It's not over. We need you." "I need you," Tenica countered, smashing her fists against the armor. Tears were beginning to run down her cheeks. "It is okay. You are safe now," he said as he twisted in his stance to sit down against the airlock door. Tenica shook her head and kneeled down to tug on his arm, now practically screaming, "You're not done yet, warrior! We need you!" "Take care of the rest of the team. That is your mission now, friend," Vasil said. 10 minutes later, Cal walked into the cargo bay with a rifle over his shoulder. When he saw Vasil in his armor slumped against the wall and Tenica sitting in his arms, he knew instantly this was it. Walking up to the pair, Cal asked, "Is he all right?" Tenica looked only slightly in Cal's direction before shaking her head no. "Did you find her?" "I got through to the Rabbit's Foot. They want to make a deal to get Gia back," Cal said as he looked around. Tenica stuck her thumb out toward the airlock next to them. Cal's eyes went wide for a second before he tentatively walked to the airlock and saw that it was still open to the vacuum outside the ship. Sucking some air in between his teeth, Cal said, "Crap." System, the last resort. Zenith jump point. Jump ship, Rabbit's Foot. The 3 jump ships now sat motionless at the jump point, though rescue ships still ferried to and from the wreck of the Kikumaru, its dropships, and the aerospace fighters scattered around the Zenith jump point in various states of destruction. The Skyfire was clearly in trouble as it was spilling some chemical from a large tear in its hull which the Ravens had created. It spewed what looked like a mixture of water and fuel out into the vacuum around it. Rin felt a deep relief as Miri reported that the Eulalia had successfully attached to the Rabbit's Foot. There was nothing but their agreement with the Combine keeping them in the system, and the urge to jump away was powerful. When Cal walked onto the bridge of the Rabbit's Foot, she lost her composure and went to give him a hug, squeezing her chuckling friend tightly. "Hey now, behave yourself. You've got a gruff reputation to protect," Cal said, smiling down at her. Their reunion was interrupted by Miri, who said that Guider Flores was demanding a conversation. Letting go of Cal, Rin frowned and walked over to the holotable. She was not looking forward to this conversation after hearing about what happened on the Eulalia from Cal before they arrived. When Flores appeared on the holotable, Rin started quickly and stated, "Hello, Guider Flores. I regret to inform you that there's been an incident on the Eulalia. Gia attempted to escape and fatally wounded one of our team. Before he passed, he killed Gia in return." Guider Flores didn't react much at first, just soaking in the information for a few moments before saying, "We would like confirmation. Please arrange transfer of the body." Rin frowned and replied, "I'm afraid that won't be possible as he threw her out of an airlock," while bracing for the furious reaction. "You threw Gia, the heir to the last resort, out of an airlock?" Flores asked with a completely deadpan look. Rin nodded but said nothing else. As if suddenly releasing air from a balloon, Flores began to laugh loudly. You threw her out of an airlock? Oh, what I would have given to see the look on her face, she said as she struggled to regain her composure. Rin looked over at Cal, who shrugged in response. Still trying to recover, Flores wiped a tear from her eye and said, "Collect your life pods and jump from this system. We would prefer to never see you again." Rin nodded and replied, "On that we agree. I will notify Captain Oren, but he's still going to ask about that comm blocking tech." Flores abruptly cut the connection, and Rin felt a wave of additional relief. She put both her fists onto the holotable and leaned forward onto them, just letting the sensation linger for a few moments. "Can you please let Captain Oren know we are ready to jump from the system as soon as they have finished their recovery operations?" Rin said, looking over at Miri. "Aft Captain," Miri said with a smile. New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Spinward Operations Area, System J5383, Zenith Jump Point, November 19th, 3152. Standing in the cargo bay of the Rabbit's Foot, it was heartening to see the NEC teams standing in attention. It had been an extravagant expense to pay for that white and metallic blue uniforms so many months ago before the expedition first set out across the stars of the periphery. However, now it was worth it to see them together again. Rin's boots clicked smartly on the steel plate as she walked up to the line. "By all rights and reason, we should not be here right now," Rin said in her best authoritative captain's voice. Her eyes scanned across the Mechwarriors, the techs, the medics, and the science team, which stood in neat lines out of respect. Rin's eyes fell on Olivia, and she smiled at the Mechwarrior, who returned a nod. Max stood tall next to her with a proud look on his face. Next to him, Akif still looked a little guilty, avoiding eye contact with Rin as she looked at him. Tenica stood in the end, wearing her uniform, as expected, except for the rolled-up sleeve on her arm, exposing the eagle on her forearm. She wasn't looking at Rin, but that was understandable. Stepping forward, Rin reached out and placed her hand on the cool metal of Vasil's battle armor laying in front of them. It lay in a makeshift steel crate which Tenica and the techs had fashioned for the occasion to give the fallen elemental a casket. The marks on Vasil's armor had been repaired and painted over so it would look as good as it did the day the armor was first manufactured. Rin looked down over the armor, knowing that the man inside had given his all for the mission, and now the team was standing around him. Taking a deep breath, Rin began to speak. Vasil was a clan warrior without a clan. He was a warrior without a war. He was a friend without friends, until he stepped onto this ship and became part of this team, this mission, where he found friends that he tirelessly defended until the last moments of his life. Rin sighed and stepped back, wiping away a tear from her eye as Cal stepped forward. As always, his presence gave her strength, and he took his hat off and ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair before saying, "Vasil was tough, but deep down, I think we all knew he was a softie inside. We all got hints of it from time to time, and I appreciate that. I think it bodes well to the future of humanity that no matter where we come from and the trauma we face in life, we still strive to build connections with others. We thank you for that reminder, Vasil." Cal stepped back and stood next to Rin while Tenica stepped forward. She gently placed her hand on the chest plate of the elemental armor. No one spoke or moved over the next minute as the Mechwarrior stood there in silence. Finally, she began to speak. "Vasil was chased by the ghosts of the past, fighting a war he didn't start, trying to protect those who he couldn't save." Tenica paused, collecting herself for a few moments before continuing. "But he did save us. He saved us 12 times over. He stood in the way of a chaos that always seems to chase those who seek to build rather than destroy." There was another long pause as Tenica looked up at the 2 Raven pilots who stood in their clan uniforms to the side, looking stone-faced. She smiled a bit at them before looking back to Vasil and continuing. "It fills me with hope that humanity might make it if we can just find the courage to stand in the way from time to time." With that, Tenica leaned down and kissed the armor next to the viewport of the elemental armor and stepped back into line with the other Mechwarriors. A few minutes later, Rin dismissed the crew and most quietly and respectfully made their exit and returned to their duties. The Mechwarriors and Raven pilots continued to stand at attention until the bay was clear. Rin looked at Tenica and said, "We will find a good spot on a planet for him on the return trip home." Tenica nodded and said, "I'll take him when the time comes." We all will, Olivia said. End New Explorer Corps. Well, folks, that's it for now. Thank you for going on this journey with me. I consider this story of the New Explorer Corps to be one of the most important accomplishments of my life, and it's an honor to be here to share it with you. It's messy, imperfect, and could use a lot of editing, but I loved writing every single word of it. I want to take this opportunity to thank my wife, who has been instrumental in being the only person who would put up with me for so many years and has believed in me as I started down this new road. My children have been infinitely patient with me as I shared ideas for the story, and I want them to know that I live and breathe for them to have long and amazing lives full of rewarding adventures. Thank you to friends and family. I don't deserve you, but I do appreciate you. Take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.